All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm Sam.
I'm Dennis.
And this week we're here to talk What a Disaster.
What a disaster!
Exclamation point.
I feel like every episode so far has been leading up to this episode.
Yeah, in a lot of
weird
ways.
Way.
Yeah, right. It's fascinating to me, just from like a production standpoint, to think about the fact that they shot this way back in March, the pilot, and then we knew that there were going to be reshoots. Then we heard that no, not just reshoots, like they're going to shoot an entirely different premiere episode, but that this would be recycled. Initially, like the reports were like it would come third. Then then it was like, no, it's going to be sixth. And then we were just sort of like, you know what? I'm not going to even guess when it's coming. Like, hey, it'll come at some point or it won't or whatever. We'll see what happens. And then, we kind of heard through the grapevine within the past couple of weeks that yes, it would be sixth. It was about 50-50, new footage and old footage. We were able to get some comments off the record about what, some of the stuff that was retained, and some of the stuff that might have not made the cut. And then to actually see it, it really is fascinating. It's a fascinating look behind, just television production in general. So yeah, with that said, should we thank our people and then get to the
for sure. Let's do some housekeeping. Let's thank our patrons. We have Al's Play Sleep fan site, Cosplay Dad, Joanne Bartlett, Dana Bius, Rich Bourque, Kevin Butcher, Deckslower, Dermot Devlin, Barry Donovan, Brian Dreadful, Troy Edwards, Larry Ganni, Jason Geis, Michelle Hoffman, Amy Holtcamp, Bess A. Korey, oddly specific with Audra, Christopher Redmon, Adrian Saul, Karyn Saxon, Mike Stoufer, Damon Sugameli, Larry Trujillo, Jill Wilson, and of course, our anonymous donors. If you would like to become a patron, you can do it a couple of ways. If you want to do monthly, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fateswidewheel. If you want to do a one-time, we're on Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/fateswidewheel. Those things are in the show notes. And if you aren't able to contribute to us financially and you want to help us out a little bit, if you happen to listen to us on Apple Podcast, a great way to support us, if you haven't done so already, is to go make sure that you follow or subscribe or whatever terminology they're using these days, and leave us a review. That really helps people find us. And even if you're not one to write stuff out, write an actual review, just like to leave a rating that really helps out. We've got a couple new reviews that came in this week that were nice and positive. Some folks are discovering us because of the new series. Now they're going back and listening to our archives. We apologize. If you think we're lo-fi now, we were very lo-fi back then. So thank you for putting up with the additional noise, me eating sometime on the microphone, the furnace kicking on in the background, all of that. But welcome everyone to the show.
Absolutely, yes, and thank you so much for your patronage and for your listenership. We really are incredibly grateful for it. It's still mind-boggling to me sometimes that 5 years later, here we are, and not only are we still going, but that we're talking about a new version of Quantum Leap. I sent you a message last night as we were watching the screener, and it was just sort of like, how crazy is this that we are still doing this podcast, that we're watching a new Quantum Leap, and that we're lucky enough to be in a position to have access to to the screeners, and the promotional photos, and and have conversations with people, even if it's off the record. It's pretty incredible. And for everyone that has just been so generous with us, both just in spirit and engagement, and of course those financially, it's incredible to me, and I'm truly grateful for it. And as always, hopefully you're out there supporting your community and your local charities. And after all of that, if you still have a couple coins rubbing together in your pocket and you want to throw them our way, we obviously are grateful. Helps keep the lights on, because the more that this stuff happens, and the more that we start doing, it's like it starts to get like not expensive. I don't want to be like, oh my God, we're bleeding money. But I mean, there are expenses. And so it's really nice to be able to kind of take care of that. And so we really appreciate you. But even if all you're doing is, downloading and listening to us, that's really cool, because when we first started this, there was definitely a question of like, how many people are actually going to listen? Like, who is going to listen?
Yes.
And at the time, because at the time we started, there were like 3 or 4 Quantum Leap podcasts. I mean, including us. Sure. Going. And now, there's only 2 of us that are still around, and, us and the Quantum Leap podcast. And obviously they've been around.
Yeah. Well, there's
longer, but,
there's Project Quantum Leap. They're new to the scene.
Right.
They're covering
what I mean is that there's new ones, right? But,
sure,
I mean, going back to when we started 5 years ago.
I gotcha.
Yeah, the only other one that's still around would be the Quantum Leap podcast. But yeah, no, there's Project Quantum Leap podcast. There's the Waiting Room. There's there's a few others out there. There's a few others that are out there that aren't necessarily specifically Quantum Leap related, but they're doing Quantum Leap content, like Curiosity Hour and MacGyver podcast, and and a few others. Of course, folks over at Den of Geek are covering the show pretty well, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It just feels like something that I would not have imagined 5 years ago, to say the least. And shout out to folks like Adrian Saul and Alison Pregler and Larry Trujillo and and others that recently were very encouraging on Twitter, in the light of I think stuff that was maybe a little discouraging at the time when we read it. So it was sure. It's nice to know people are out there and people care.
They're out there.
Yeah.
It's great. Like the social media, and I've said this before last week, social media has just taken on its whole new life outside of the podcast, which I'm just absolutely loving that. Even if you don't listen to the podcast very often, I appreciate the comments, or if you do, appreciate those comments too. Anyway, let's get into What a Disaster. I can't believe that's actually the episode title.
I know.
So you were saying before we hit record, again, somebody attached to the show off the record. It sounds like that title started off as a joke, because that's what they were calling it behind the scenes. And I'm sure that there was some like tongue in cheek going along with like the production woes that this episode came with. And then somewhere along the way, like Janice went from being just a fanfic thing to something real within the show. It sounds like the title went from being just an inside joke to being the actual title of the episode.
Yeah. And it makes sense when you think about it, when you follow both story tracks. Like, I mean, we're getting a literal disaster in the earthquake, and then with the present day stuff, what a disaster. There's another leaper out there, and we've got to figure out what the hell's going on. And I think that, I'll go ahead and just give like my little capsule spoiler free review right now, that the intensity with which they approach that situation, the team in the present, is done very, very well. One of the things that I really, really enjoyed is the sense of humor that the present day scenes had. Now, those scenes were scripted by Martin Garrow and directed by Chris Grismer. I hope I'm saying that right. But there's a momentum to a lot of the present day scenes that I think works really, really well. There is some wonderful chemistry between our regulars that I just love. And I think that, those scenes really pop for me. I really, really enjoyed them. And I enjoyed that in spite of the levity that a lot of those scenes had, you never lost sense of the high stakes of the situation, which I really enjoyed. As for the leap itself, there's some wonderful stuff, without a doubt. I think that Raymond Lee is absolutely incredible. And going back months and months and months and months to when we were talking about how there were so many positive reports about the cast, and a lot of positive reports about Raymond Lee in particular, words like star-making performance and all that sort of stuff was getting thrown around by people that had seen the pilot, prior to the things kind of getting reshuffled. And there is no doubt that is clear in this. And I think that, he is such a standout in the leap, that in some ways it almost, I hesitate to say this, but it's almost to the detriment of everything else around him. Like, he's so good that when things start to feel a little over the top, or like the situations that he's in, not him, like he's so perfect but when stuff starts to just feel maybe not quite on par with some of the other stuff that we've seen in the previous 5 episodes, it's more noticeable because he is so good. And I think that it's hard to put a critical eye on stuff that was shot, 6 months ago, by Helen Shaver, the director of the pilot, written by Steve Lillian and Brian Winbrandt, and then realize, of course, that we're also seeing stuff that's scripted by Martin Garrow and shot by Chris Grismer, because there are at least 2, 3. I can't put my finger on the number of scenes exactly, but there's at least, let's say 3. There's could be more, could be less, but there's 3 new scenes in the Leap itself. Like everything at the project is new. There's nothing recycled from the original episode in the project. The Leap itself has a couple of new scenes here or there. And yet at the same time, it doesn't feel that disjointed. I think that it depends on how you're watching the episode and how you're approaching the episode and how aware you are of the fact that there were reshoots. I don't necessarily think too much stands out to me overall. Like if I look at the episode, if I stand back, it's like, oh yeah, this holds together. This is great. Wow, what a miracle of production. If you look at it with a little bit more scrutiny, there are definitely some moments that I think stick out and don't fit in so much as we've had 5 episodes before this. It's clear that in a couple of scenes, like they're still kind of finding their way a bit. And it's strange because based off of the way that the previous 5 episodes were shot, and just kind of the overall direction, man, I really don't want to say this. I really don't want to say this, but it's true. I was a little disappointed. I think I had higher expectations, especially from somebody like Helen Shaver, because she does have so much experience, and I think she's got an incredible background in film and television, both as an actor and producer and director. And there were a couple of times when I don't know, it didn't feel quite as propulsive as some of the leaps in prior episodes. Certainly, leaps like Somebody Up There Likes Ben and A Decent Proposal, and even Salvation or Bust. I felt like, and certainly the premiere episode. So it's an interesting episode in that respect. Overall, I think it's good. I really do. I hesitate to like rank it off of 6 episodes because I feel like it would probably fall. It wouldn't be in the top 3. But I do think that there are some standout moments, and I think overall, just what a showcase for Raymond Lee. He's just so incredibly good. And the other person that I want to give a shout out to is Nanrissa Lee as Jenn. Like Jenn has really come alive in the last couple of episodes, and I am just really loving her character, and of course, there's Mason. They're great. Like obviously we love them. I think Caitlin does some great work. I think Ernie does some great work, and I'll save the rest for spoilers.
Sure. I have basically 2 reviews of this, like non-spoiler version. If I come into this episode and I don't give any allowances for the circumstances with the way this episode was created, I'm much like you. I think this is one of the weaker episodes. I think the Leap story is not given time to breathe. I don't have time to really care about the characters or really care about the situation. I think a part of that is because like the way some stuff that was not usable and how they had to balance it out with the newly shot footage. And some of it was due to some little details that were originally in the pilot script, but were either they weren't shot or they were cut out of what we saw as the final product. And as we get into the detailed version, I'll get a little bit more into that. And particularly, like you said, like Raymond, any failures in this episode is not due to the acting. It's to the editing. It's what was cut. One particular story, what we learn about Ben by way of his memory coming back and flashbacks.
Yes.
It doesn't work. And it does not work because of the way it was scripted. I know what they were going for. They were doing a callback to the original series,
right?
But it ends up not working. And I'll get into the details of why I don't think it works when we get there. As far as the project stuff, like you said, everything works. I like the levity. Of it for the most part. There's one part where I think it's almost a little bit too light, and I wanted it to be not serious, but I wanted the characters to be smarter than what they were in that particular scene. And that could be a product of me taking things too seriously sometimes, which I will totally admit I am. Sometimes I forget that this is just a fun.
Both.
Yeah, sometimes I forget that this is just a fun time travel show and to let it go. But there was one moment I wanted the characters to be smarter, and I'll get into that into the thing. That being said, to allow for the circumstance with this episode was created. I think if you are an artist that works in the storytelling medium in any way whatsoever, especially in television or film, you should definitely watch this episode. You should do it like I had the opportunity to watch the episode twice. Last night we watched the screener, no notes. And then I watched it again today, watching it side by side, scrolling along with the pilot script that we received back in February. And it's just interesting to like watch the episode, read the script, like, oh, like this was like this bit of lines, oh, they've already used that in a previous episode, or like this whole chunk they've already used in a previous episode, reshot, but they've used it in a previous episode. I think it's just very interesting. And like you said, it is to Martin Garrow's credit how they were able to how they were able to piece a new episode together. For that reason alone, I think this episode is worth watching. I'm going to have criticism about this episode. I may have more criticisms about this episode than I've had any other previous one. But again, I also think it's because like now we're 6 episodes in and we can manage to be a little bit more nitpicky about the things that we love. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So yeah. That being said, let's get into it.
All right. So I think one of the things that is a little jarring, and it happens right off the bat, is that, Ben looks a little bit more disoriented than I think maybe we would expect when he first leaps in.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because even looking at Salvation or Bust, for instance, and I think that in a way we have to compare it to the recent episodes, right? Because that's what we have to go off of, and his reactions to when he first leaps in. There's certainly a moment of disorientation where he's trying to figure out what's happening in that moment. The looks that he's giving around at the bar when he first leaps in are more like, what the hell is happening here? And I think that was kind of the first moment where I was just sort of like, yep, that's the pilot speaking to me, if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
Now they cut out some stuff. One of the first things that they cut out is they cut the first mirror image moment, which I think obviously they had to, because in that particular moment, Ben was shocked by it all. He had a brief conversation with the bartender. That's when he kind of noticed the baseball game. And then everything else is pretty much the same from there.
Which, by the way, if you've seen any of the trailers for the series, they have used that mirror image shot in there. It's like when he's looking in the mirror and he's like the white guy with the stereotypical 80s mustache and he wipes his hand across his face. You've seen that shot. It was just obviously cut from what we saw for obvious reasons.
Yeah. We get Jewel State here playing Naomi. I thought that at the beginning there, I really enjoyed her a lot. I really enjoyed kind of seeing her lay it all out for her husband, for Ben, why they're getting the divorce, what's happening. I feel like it sets up some really wonderful stuff. Due to some of the cuts that are made later, I don't think we ever get the real payoff. There's some stuff that just ends up being missing. And I'll go ahead and talk about it right now. We don't have to go through it in a linear fashion. Sure. Mm-hmm. We really miss out, I think, on the overall impact of her relationship with Jason, their son, because of the fact that some of the stuff that they cut was actually at the project. There's some really lovely scenes between Ian and Addison where they're talking about Jason's Instagram account, for instance. And Ian is the one that actually discovers there's no pictures of Jason with his mother on this. And that's what prompts the whole, oh, he doesn't have a relationship with his mom.
Yeah. First, you got to save him from dying in the building. Then you got to save the relationship with the mom afterwards.
Yeah.
Because to be more clear, what Ian sees on Jason's Instagram account in the present no pictures of his mom, and so that's the thing that they have
Right.
to fix. Yeah,
And there's some
I sorely missed that too.
right, and I feel like there's some moments too where we learn the fact that like these two do not end up together. They both they get the divorce, and I think it made a really lovely statement about the fact that like Jason turns out great, right? Like Jason turns out fine. His parents do the right thing in deciding to get that divorce, and I think that you know, missing certain pieces of nuance, just small bits, affected the overall payoff and my investiture in the actual leap itself, which I know has been a criticism for a lot of people, one that I don't always agree with. I think that like you look at episodes 3 and 4, and I would say even Atlantis in particular, I think the leaps are really, really well done. I felt very invested in the leaps. I felt invested in the other characters. I mean, especially in somebody up there like Ben. But yeah, so this is one where I do feel like the criticism will probably be a bit valid, and part of that is, again, with that script, there was just on the page we loved it, we really, really loved it, and then on the screen there were parts that just made me feel a little tepid, and as I was watching, I mean, I even texted you, I was like, I think I get why they went with the new premiere.
The thing is I feel like overall, and I texted this to you last night, this episode just feels different because obviously in previous episodes we've been shooting on sets, we've been shooting on backlots, which is no criticism to that, but it has an obvious look and then you just get used to that look. Right. This, for the most part, it was shot on location in Vancouver, so everything just looks very different. For one, rewatching the episode today and seeing the comparisons with the script, and we just talked about like the Instagram account, there are other things. I think it was great on the page, but I think we just lost some like little small moments in the episode that kind of took away. Like, example for another one, when we get to the scene where Naomi gets shocked and her heart stops, and Ben has to do the chest thump in the script, and I think rewatching it, I think it was shot, but then they edited out for time and for clarity. He takes some time to build up to like have the courage to like bring the fist down and hit Naomi in the chest. Meanwhile, Ian in the future is reading to Addison through the handling through the imaging chamber, like, oh, her chances of dying now are 52%. Now they're 70%. Yeah. Now they're whatever. And Addison's like you got to do the hit or she's going to die. And I feel like having that tension taken away kind of took away from the moment.
Absolutely.
Because we just had like, oh, you know, in the script, there was like a little bit more of like a flair and a presentation to like, oh, here's this hologram of the arc that you need to hit. We don't need that anymore because we got the whole boxing set and somebody up there like Ben. So we didn't need that whole explanation. So it was just like, oh, here's the arch, here's what you do, one little bit of encouragement, and he does it. And by taking Ian out of that scene and reading off the odds, it kind of took the tension away from that scene. Yeah. So like I said, I'm not even sure if it's stuff that it looked good on page, it was just missing in the shooting. I just wonder if it's stuff that they took out for time.
Well, it's interesting too to think about like the what happens to an episode after it's shot. You know, like a director makes the choices on set about what they're shooting, how they're shooting it, right? And producers might have some bit of influence, and sometimes more influence than others. But sometimes, you know, one of the things like we heard through the grapevine is like with Salvation or Bust, for instance, when it came time to edit that episode, the production team was not necessarily thrilled with everything that they had. Like there were certain things that they maybe would have done differently, or they would have went. And so it's kind of like one of those things where you're just sort of like, well, we've got to work with what we've got. And I think that also affected this episode. I think that I think that there was, you know, there was an element from the production team, and obviously with Martin, you know, writing the new scenes and being the executive producer and you know, kind of being there at the helm. I think that, yeah, there's probably a chance of like, okay, you know, we've got to use what we've got. And this is, again, no shade, because some of it's great, right? Some of it looks really good. And some of it, like you're saying, like there's some scenes, especially when the earthquake first hits, like there's some really good looking stuff that's going on, special effects wise. And some of the stuff that Addison gets to do, and you know, and even like showing the arc that Ben has to use to hit Naomi in the chest, like you're saying, to restart her heart. Like there's just some really, really wonderful stuff at play. But ultimately, yeah, you have to make those choices, right? You have to make those choices and say like, okay, you know, we've only got this shot, right? So how do we trim it? What do we do? What do we put in there? Like, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had another angle? Well, we don't have that, so we're gonna have to do this. And again, that's why I think that this episode is such a wonderful study, you know, in like television production, because it really is all about the choices. And I think that one of the things that we can absolutely say, and this is, I mean, probably one of the highest compliments I can give, is that the choices that were made, I could not imagine making a different choice, right? Like I think that ultimately they did the absolute best with what they had. It's I mean, again, I hate to say this, I guess I'm just kind of disappointed because what we read and what was kind of in my head didn't seem to translate as well. And maybe that's because I don't know crap about, you know, reading a television script. I mean, I think I do, but you know, it's still kind of interesting to think, right?
And I'm going to say this because, you know, I have gone back and I've read snippets over the last few months, but this is the first time I've gone back and read the script since February, so several months ago. And I think we have to consider, like, reading that script for the first time, it was colored through the fact of, holy shit, we have a quantum leap script and it's actually happening, and everything was great, you know. I will say there are moments in the final product. I don't think we got the final version of the script. I think there was like at least one more rewrite that happened, or they were rewriting on the set. Because, you know, for example, in the first scene in the script that we got, Naomi says a couple things and then she just pretty much asks for a divorce. In the final version, we get a lot of stuff about like their choices of like taking a new job and moving and everything. All of that gets front loaded now, and that was not in the script that we got.
It almost, you know, it almost makes me wonder. We know Jewel reshot some stuff. Like there's at least like one scene that we can know for a fact is new with her. It almost makes me wonder if maybe some of that stuff that I was talking about earlier is new as well, because she delivers a lot of exposition about the nature of, you know, the relationship and the dissolution of the relationship. Now it could be exactly what you're saying, but because all of her stuff is shot from an angle where it's literally like just her, like we don't really see everything, you know, else in the same manner that we do from the wide shots that are clearly left over from you know, the pilot, I would imagine. I don't know, maybe not though. And I agree. I mean, I think that there's every likelihood that there was stuff that was, you know, rewritten or polished or whatever on the way to actual production or during production. The other moment that I want to talk about real quick before I kind of move on and maybe do a little bit more linear stuff is that one of the things that moved me quite a bit on the page were the flashbacks. Part of the thing is the flashbacks on the page, and I haven't looked at the script in a while, so please correct me if I'm wrong, did not actually have dialogue or much dialogue at all. They didn't have dialogue. And that worked. The minute they started adding the dialogue, and the minute they started, even though some of it was obviously in Korean, the minute they started doing that, it started to take on a very melodramatic bent that to me deflated so much of the power of what I think could have been through those flashbacks. Also, there were too many. In the script, I don't remember them being peppered throughout that way.
They were just like flashes of images that he had. There was no dialogue in these flashbacks.
It didn't work. And that really, again, that's really disappointing, because on the page, I felt like it worked. And the phone call at the end, because the flashbacks hadn't worked, the phone call ended up falling kind of flat. Like, I wanted to be moved by it. I was so close to being moved by it all. I was so close. I even had to ask myself at one point, I was like, man, I feel like when I first read this, I got choked up, but now I'm just kind of watching it. And it's not because I'd read it, not because I knew what was coming. You know, it was because when I watched Somebody Up There Likes Ben, I watched that episode twice. And when I watched it the second time, I still got choked up in the same places that I got choked up the first time. This was just a case of like, it just ended up falling flat. I love the nod. I love the fact that he called his mom. It just did not end up working as well as it could have.
Here's why I think it doesn't work. One, this is a moment that they lost from the script. He gets the idea in his head in a much earlier scene that his mom's still alive and that he can call her. But he can't call her because lines are down, because of the earthquake. So it's a bigger deal at the end of the episode when he hears the phones suddenly start working in the hospital. It's like a moment of like, oh, now the phones are working. Now I can make this phone call. So it's the fact that we got introduced to this idea of him calling his mom earlier in the episode, very much like Sam in the pilot episode.
Exactly.
And I found it powerful when reading the script, but I never found it as powerful as Sam calling his dad.
Sure.
Because the payoff is that Sam actually got to talk to his dad.
Right.
And we don't get that payoff with his mom. And so all the couple of scenes in the OG pilot, Sam's struggling to remember the phone number to call. The payoff is getting to talk to dad. And if you don't get that payoff, it's a nice hat tip to the OG, but it doesn't work.
And so much mirrors the OG, like you said, is it like, I mean, down to Addison giving Ben the last number in the same way that Al, gives Sam the number. And so I think that like it's a beautiful nod. And on the page, it really got me. And I think part of it was because it was a nod, because of what it called back to. But part of it also was that I could just, again, kind of seen in my head the nature of these flashbacks. And I think by having all the stuff added in, with the dialogue and everything, it didn't have the same impact to me that I think it could have had. I think that the other thing that's odd too about this stuff is that Addison has some dialogue right off the bat, which makes sense. It's fine. I get what it's trying to do, and I think a lot of people who know the nature of the episode will as well. She says early on, she's like, "You just have to focus on this leap. Don't worry about Walter Leaper X."
It's almost Martinez. Like a little wink. It's almost like a little wink. Right. She's not just telling Ben.
Exactly.
She's not just telling Ben. She's telling us at home. Hey, we got this big thing last week, but we can't focus on that right now because we've written ourselves into an earthquake. So
you got And I guess that in that respect, like at least the stakes are high enough, right? The stakes are high enough to make you understand that's like, well, it's the middle of an earthquake. I get it. But
I will say this though, in defense, because you said back in the very first scene, you can tell it's the pilot because Ben is very disoriented looking around. I'm gonna give it a pass, and I think it works for me for two reasons.
Sure. I think I know what you're gonna say.
One, he is in an environment that is much closer to his own lifetime, because he's been back like further along. So he's been back like he's a little bit older, that he can remember a little bit more. He's hooked into a very specific event that he can remember, for one. Two, holy shit, like what just happened like right before he leaped in the last
right
thing. So he's getting his bearings of like having this big thing dropped on him, and now he literally gets dropped into the middle of this conversation.
And you know what I think another thing is that now that I'm thinking about it too, and I almost want to amend what I said earlier, is it also works on another level of like he's looking for Leaper X. He's looking around and be like, is he here?
Because he goes from a bar to a bar.
Right. Well, and something else that he says, and he says this before any knowledge about the earthquake, before seeing the baseball game on TV, before any of that. And I found it fascinating because he asks Naomi, he says, "Is this San Francisco?" And that stood out to me. And it stood out to me for two reasons. Is because obviously in the last episode, there's Diego is from San Francisco. That's where he'd been residing. Right. Yeah. The other thing is like, I'm wondering, I'm curious if it's like, is he, and I can't remember if this is in the script, if this was new, if this wasn't new or what, but there was this part of me that kind of thought, is he maybe starting to remember the trajectory of his leaps? Like, is he maybe starting to kind of understand and be like, San Francisco is someplace I needed to hit. Okay, I'm in San Francisco. Now what? I don't know. I mean, it's and maybe it's absolutely nothing. But it was interesting that he said it before he really recognized, I don't know, anything else. I mean, I think at that point maybe he'd seen like an Oakland A's ball cap or jersey. I don't know.
I think because and I don't think this was something that they did in editing. I think this is a rewrite that they did in the script. He breaks away from Naomi. He goes up to the street level. He gets to look around. I'm sure that's where the mirror image shot was. I think like that's where he realizes. Oh, and a nice hat tip to the original. He kind of has this moment of like looking around and realizing that he is not in his own time, and he actually says, "Okay, I'd like to wake up now."
Yeah,
which was a hat tip to Sam saying that up to God in the pilot.
Right.
Then there was also an unfortunate Milli Vanilli joke, which I won't get into. But and then he goes back to the bar, forgets Naomi, and then he goes up to the bar and asks the bartender for a drink.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say, I think the MI in San Francisco bit may be I don't think it was editing. I think they may have tightened that up a little bit and just in the writing.
Oh, sure. I get what you're saying.
And I wonder if he, like the mirror image shot that we know that they shot because we've seen it in the trailers, if that wasn't before the earthquake, but that was at some point after the earthquake and he was already up on street level, that's when he looked in the mirror and saw himself. And
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's the other thing, right? That's kind of fascinating about this. There's so much stuff that I feel like we're going to have to get. We're going to have to see an interview or hear an interview or read an interview, with Martin or Dean or somebody else closely involved with the production of this episode to kind of let us know some of that stuff. And one of the things that would be fascinating to me is, like, I know in the age of streaming this rarely happens anymore, which is so unfortunate. But like, if there's a Blu-ray box set that's released of the first season, I would love to see like a balls out behind the scenes process of this episode specifically.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Just give us a rough cut of what they showed on the network.
There's a part of me that almost wonders if they would do that if they released a box set as an extra, if they wouldn't release it. I would love it. I maybe they wouldn't, I don't know, but there's a part of me that's just sort of like, man, just do it. Show us the real thing. Not because I think it would be better or anything like that, but because it would be just really interesting to be able to compare the two.
An alternate, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But let's face it, oftentimes when that happens, it's like years later. I mean, how long did it take us to get the screen, the screen test for oh God, I am so blanking right now. The other Marty McFly,
Eric Stoltz.
Yes, thank you, Eric Stoltz.
Sure.
I don't know.
The only comparison that I can think of. Did you watch the first season of Sliders?
Yes.
So I won't get like bogged down like heavy into the details. But the network decided to show, other than the pilot, they decided to show the next few episodes out of order. And because of that, there was one particular like story element, in particular, one episode that came along like fifth when it was supposed to be the second episode. It just didn't make sense at all.
Right.
And the only reason and the only explanation you got was like, this was just when the internet was starting to become a thing. And like, you can go on the internet and read what it was supposed to be. I know that in the year break between the first and the second season, they actually considered going back in and re-editing that episode and putting them back into order to fix it, to make it all make sense.
Right.
But considering that Sliders was just a barely successful show and it just got barely picked up for a second season after a huge writing campaign, that happened. Maybe if Quantum Leap takes off and it gets beyond like a second season, and especially like you said, like in the age of streaming, it's not so much. They do have some version of a rough cut out there that they showed the network.
Right.
Maybe they will give that to us as a treat.
That'd be cool. We'll see if it happens down the road. I mean, it took like almost 20 years or maybe even more, 25 years for the Cage, the original Star Trek pilot, to actually be shown in its entirety. Now, obviously, most of that footage had been reused in the Menagerie two-parter of Star Trek, but it's interesting to think that that we have that, right? We can kind of compare the two. Anyway, back to what a disaster.
But one thing about this first thing that I want to know, because it was missing on the page, I didn't see it, but one thing that stuck out to me is that when we get the first obviously reshot scene of Ben and Addison together, and Ben is talking about, hey, this woman Naomi, she wants a divorce.
Yeah,
he makes a couple of comments about, I don't blame her.
Yeah,
this guy doesn't seem like
he
a very
seems like an awful guy. Yeah.
And it's like, I didn't get that. Like,
no, I know.
Other than like him like looking in a mirror and just getting a sense of who the guy was off of looking in the mirror, there was nothing in the dialogue and even nothing in the script that made me think that John was not a good guy. It's just him and Naomi weren't working.
It makes me wonder if, for Ben and his perspective on it, the idea that, if you're going to uproot your family and move, and then basically like throw all this shade at your partner for forcing you to do this after the fact, that does feel like kind of a rotten thing. So maybe that's where the judgment's coming from. Maybe for him, it's the idea that it's like, John, you really should have had a conversation perhaps before you moved about like, no, I really don't want to do this. And maybe then you could have, figured things out, as opposed to like, moving along, going along with the plan and everything, and then just being kind of shitty, for a while before finally she has to just kind of pull the trigger and say like, this isn't working, and you've made me feel like it's my fault. And I think also that there's enough that Naomi says that things hadn't been working even before the move, and that maybe she thought that the move was going to help things. So I don't know. But I agree with you. I do agree with you. I'm just kind of maybe trying to, make up reasons for it. We of course also in the scene, the handling stops functioning properly, so Addison has to go and get a new handling.
Who said that last week that was going to happen? Was that you or me? I can't remember.
I think it was both of us, honestly. I think we might have.
I was thinking like I was thinking, we are fate's wide wheel. We are so in tune with each other that when Sam gets gas, I break wind.
Oh no.
Because a lot of times, like I can't remember whose idea that was, but as soon as she starts hitting the hand, like whatever, and I'm like, oh, here it comes. We're gonna get the replacement hand link.
Well, and how great was it that they kind of basically set it up in the previous episode, because she hit the hand link in the previous episode. I know, too. Yeah.
I love it, and I'm just gonna put this out there right now. I actually love the old school version of the hand link.
Me too.
I love the fact that they used that wasn't the gummy bear sound effects they were using. That was like season 1, season 2 handling sound effects. I would love it if we've just seen this long con, like for the first 5 episodes, where this isn't the real hand link. They're just going to bring back the old hand link.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what she's going
to be gone.
That's what she's going to use from now on.
Yeah, it's it's interesting because she comes back in and Ian is there, and she's like, hey, this isn't working, and they're like, oh, just take the older model. But
and it's almost like a little like a wink to the audience, like, hey,
right,
you
guys know.
Yeah.
I think that I think that the project scenes, let's talk a little bit about the project stuff, because we've spent some time now on the leap, and we'll get back to it because obviously there's more stuff. But one of the things right off the bat is that obviously they're like, we got to figure out what the hell's going on here. There's a great line. I can't remember. I think it's Magic's line about it's been 12 hours. What do we know? And I love that they have put like, they've literally like said, it's been 12 hours since Leaper X, which is Ian's name, which is awesome. I mean, again, they're just great, but like I love that we've got this idea that's like only 12 hours have passed, so they're still trying to figure out what the hell's going on as well. And there's some wonderful dialogue here, and again, this is where Jenn really starts to come alive for me. She's talking, and she lays it out so wonderfully. She's like, look, either it's a private company, it's a foreign government, or it's our project. And then Addison has that great line. It's like, well, no, we knew when Ben leaved. And that's when Jenn just hits them all with, not if he's from the future. And it's kind of like, yes, it's like, yes, Jenn, you get it. Yeah. And again, just the momentum, the way that they're all working together, the stuff, they're very in sync, and it just works really, really well. The dialogue, I think, sparkles for the most part. And there are a couple of points where the humor, I think, does feel a little forced and doesn't work quite as well, but there are a lot of times where it does. And you know what? We've talked so much about so many of the other characters, but I got to give it to both Ernie and Narissa, because the relationship between Magic and Jenn is really like it's turned into one of my favorite relationships in the show. And I love the interplay between the two of them. I love that they're the ones that go to visit Leaper X. And how great is Walter?
Oh yeah.
I mean, we've seen, so I think we can say this. We've seen the script or part of the script anyway for this episode, for the scenes, for the scene, with Martinez, and it says in the script at one point, it literally says, you can't help but like this guy. And I'm just like, well, then you found the perfect actor, because you're right, I can't help but like this guy. And it's just like, this is going to be good. Like there's and I love that we don't get too much. I think part of that is dictated by the fact that, again, there can't be too much of an investigation into what's going on, just due to the nature of the leap and the episode being shot so much beforehand. And as Addison says, we got to keep focused on the leap. But man, like it's, what we do get is a pretty big deal. And I just love that Magic and Jenn are kind of like, this is weird. Like this is not
Mhm.
some, bad guy out there to screw everything up. Like there's something about this guy that we trust and we like, and I don't know what to do with that, which is really
Sure.
interesting to me.
Yeah. So let me jump back. The moment where I thought there was too much levity that I mentioned in my non-spoiler
Mhm.
part. And I understand from a writing perspective why they had to do this,
Oh,
because they had to make
I
sure that
think I know what you're gonna say.
that everybody was caught up when Jenn throws out the possibility that this is the project in the future where Leaper X is leaping from. And Addison and Magic have to wrap their heads around that. And like even Magic's
Yeah.
line of like, this makes my head hurt. And like, you've been the head of a time travel project for 5 years. And I
Right,
know that you
right.
actually haven't done any time travel yet, but I'm sure in
Sam Beckett
conversations,
leaped
like,
into you
yeah,
from
yes,
the
yeah,
future.
like paradoxes like this have come up. And like again, I'm not a professional. I'm just literally a guy sitting in his basement doing a podcast about this. But I would have loved it if the writing had been a little bit more like, if Jenn had thrown that line out, and instead of like, this makes my head hurt, if there was just a collective, fuck,
Right. Well, and the
you
thing is
know?
again, Jen has such a, there's I think it's
By the
between
way, this is
Jen.
a mind cuss.
Oh, that was
This is a
great.
this is a mind cuss. Yeah.
I love that too, because we've gotten the precedent already set that Ian has used, like, they've used some,
A cluster cuss, yeah.
right. Not quite good place type cussing, but close to it.
Yeah.
So anyway, the other thing that I love too is that, Jen and Ian, I believe, have a scene later and where they're talking about the fact that what if we set this off? What if by the nature of you and Magic going to visit Martinez,
Yeah.
we are now responsible for what's going to happen. And I loved that was sprinkled in, because it really, to me, it starts to kind of up the game a bit of what they can do with time travel, and knowing a little bit about what's coming, with some episodes down the
Mhm.
road. I'm just very excited for the way that they're going to play with those aspects of time travel that were never really touched on in the original series, or if they were, it was just very, very briefly.
Sure.
Um, and I dig that. I think that one of the things that the classic series leaned into a lot of times to sort of help explain away any of the changes that they were making was a certain amount of predestination, right down to the fact that in spite of Sam making this huge change for Al Calavici, so that, he never gets married to any of these other wives, he stays married to Beth, he, has this happy life with Beth, he has kids, all that sort of stuff. In spite of all of that, Al still ends up being best friends with Sam at Project Quantum Leap. And so I like that. I think that's great. But the nice thing is now I think the Revival series gets the opportunity to do something maybe a little bit different,
Mhm.
or while still playing in the same sandbox with some of the same rules, starts to take, a look at it from different angles, which is exciting.
Mhm.
And I think that they've really laid that open now with Leaper X coming into the picture.
Yeah. So speaking of rules, let's talk about the scene between Magic and Jenn, where Jenn
Yes.
explains how they got the picture
This
of
is
Leaper,
great.
how they got the picture of Leaper X in the imaging chamber, and what's the name of the guy? I jotted the line.
Maruda,
Mar, Maduka, I think it's Maduka.
Maduka,
Yeah,
yeah, something like
Maduka
that.
has
Yeah.
this whole diorama thing. We're starting to get worried about him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was great. I know I kind of skipped over that, and I really shouldn't have, because it's very important to how they found Martinez. Yeah, go ahead. No, this
but
is
anyway,
great stuff.
so what I love about the scene is just that it sets up the rules just very clearly. And I know in online forums, like everybody wants to get hung up about the leaper rules, like especially now that we've introduced like another kind of leaper. Like there's been so much dialogue in the last week. We're like, well, was it the leaper? Was it the leapy that we were seeing? And like they touched each other, they didn't touch each other. So Ben shouldn't have been able to see him. And like they keep saying, like with the new technology, with the new code that Ben uploaded, everything has changed. Just please embrace the rules that they give us now. Don't get bogged down in what the old rules used to be, because they were just making the rules up as they went along in the original series.
And I
And
think
that's what they're
the
doing
other
here.
thing I'll throw out there to add to that real quick is, you got to remember Deborah Pratt's on set. Like,
Mhm,
Deborah Pratt is everything that we love about Quantum Leap, right?
mhm.
Like, I mean, she really is. So have a little faith in her ability to discern between what matters and what doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
that's not to say that she can't be overruled. Obviously, she can. Martin's the one running the ship, right? Dean is kind of like the second in command, and Dean seems to have a lot of input into like what's happening, right? And on top of that, you've got all this wonderful writers' room who also have producer credits on there. So I mean, there's a lot of people there that certainly are around, right?
Mhm.
But again, with Deborah being there, just have a little faith, and then also have a little faith in the people that are crafting the show, because from everything we've heard, like these people love Quantum Leap. And
Yeah.
and I think that the other thing is too is like patience, because why should they lay everything out to you right off the bat? Yes, Genesis did a lot of that work, right? But I think that in 1989, that's what you did. In 2022, I mean, it's curious to me that there is so much dialogue about the rules and where's the waiting room and what, and all that sort of stuff, because I feel like there's a lot of shows out there that very rarely give you everything up front. They parse it out to you over
Yeah.
time, and sometimes they tell you one thing, and then 10 episodes down the road they say, "Oh, remember that one thing we told you? That was a lie." There's a certain unreliable narrative that
Mhm.
happens in a lot of TV shows. And so I think that, like, yeah, it's like, give it a chance.
I
We
think
talked
it's a
about Good Place a couple of times, and like you mentioned last week, I think, about Good Place and the fact that, like, the reveals that they did and when they did them, like there was so much that changed about that show from
yeah.
point A to the
Point
the
B.
Z. And so yeah.
I mean, again, just to my point, that was you that pointed that out. Anyway, um, I think it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing,
Totally.
because in the last few weeks we've seen some people come out and they talked about how brilliant the pilot was for the OG Quantum Leap and how they simply laid everything out. But also at the same time, if you can find them online, and they're hard to dig for, if you can find some of the original reviews that came out when the series premiered, a lot of critics found the pilot plotting and dull and too much explanation.
Right.
So it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing.
Oh,
They could have
totally.
had they could have had a 2-hour premiere where they explained all of the rules, how the
God, I
waiting
wish they
room,
would
the
have had a
absence
2-hour
era
premiere.
lacked whatever. Like, we would have loved it.
Right.
A lot of us would have loved it, but a lot of people probably would have found it boring. So
Well, but I also feel like it's like, I'm glad we didn't get that. And I'm glad that we still haven't gotten all of our answers, because Magic even says a few things in this episode, kind of to steer back to the episode, where it's clear that they didn't necessarily know what the hell they were doing. Like, Magic says they had to build all of this. It's not like they went out to Stallion's Gate and just shipped everything over to LA. Like, you get the idea that things were dismantled in New Mexico, that things were like just, left in shambles, that, that Al kind of ran off with as much as he could take with him, that Janice now has some of that stuff. And so, there's this idea that, like, unless of course that's where Janice is. I mean, who knows? Maybe Janice is rebuilding things out in New Mexico. Like, I get the idea that, like, as much as they knew about the original project, there's a lot of stuff that they had to do completely on their own.
sure.
And I think that, like, it'll be really interesting if at some point down the road, and I think Janice will be the vessel for a lot of this, they start to realize that, like, oh, like, we did it different. Like, this is exactly how it used to work, and how, why does ours work differently, and what did we do to, because it's like, yeah, I think that there's plenty of opportunities for explanation down the road. I'm just more happy to be engaged with this mystery and engaged with the individual leaps, and I think that that's, what they can focus on. And again, it's like you said, a damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they, I know that there are some people out there that are kind of like, oh, why isn't it just more like the old series, and, like, focusing on the leaps and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, if that's all they did, there'd be so many people, myself included, that would probably be like, why, why aren't they trying something new? Like, we're just getting a
Exactly.
rehash.
Yeah.
So, like, so yeah, there's choices that need to be made. And again, this episode is a perfect example of that. They had to make choices of what they kept and what they didn't keep, even on this leap.
Now, I'm going to say this while we're
Yeah.
speaking of rules, what they kept, what they didn't keep. Addison has a wonderful line in the pilot script that we have not heard anywhere such far, where it basically explains how the mind body thing works. And that was, you're occupying the same time and space as him. It's his body, but you're at the wheel.
Right.
I don't think we've ever
That's
heard
hilarious because
I don't think we've ever heard it that succinctly in any episode so far.
that must have been embedded in my brain because I was answering a question on Reddit the other day, and I think I literally almost typed exactly that.
Yeah.
No joke. And so it is unfortunate, and I admitted this even on the Reddit thread, is that really the only place that we've gotten the explanation of the rules has been like in an interview, that it's not been on screen yet. That said, it's kind of like, I think we get it at this point, right? I mean, there's even a moment when they're in the tunnels, when Ben's running through the tunnels, and like Addison's like, you got to take a break. Like the body that you're in hasn't worked out in like 20 years, which is also great.
For sure.
But yeah, I going back to the Jenn and the magic stuff too. I mean, it is a great moment where she breaks out the two little cowboys. She puts Ben's picture on one. She's like, "This is what we see," and it's like, and by the fact that that's what we see, then that means that we saw the face of Leaper X. And that gives him the opportunity to then try and match that picture, which leads us to another great scene that has some levity in it that also is wonderful because it gives us some more insight into Ian and also into their relationship with Ben, because there is this beautiful moment where as they're kind of going through the databases and they're like, there are trillions of images that we're searching through right now, and Magic and Jen are all just sort of like waiting there, watching the images flow by. And Ian has this beautiful line about, I wish Ben were still here so that Ben could explain to you how incredible it is what I'm doing and how all this stuff. And it's again, the way that Mason sells it, it just speaks to the level of relationship that they clearly had with Ben. Whether or not there was any romantic element to that, like you posed a while back, whatever. But again, I mean, even if it's completely platonic, it's just really, really nice. Now for comedy's sake,
they got magic to say Leaper X.
Yes, they did, which is another great moment of levity. And again, you don't lose the stakes, though, right? The stakes still aren't lost. And another great moment of levity.
I do want to say a shout out to the music, because we have not mentioned the music or the scoring very little throughout the episodes. And I've noticed like this particular episodes, the project scenes, the music.
Yep.
It seemed like that's what was helping like drive the stakes. Was the music, and also like the camera work too, which is like helping.
Very kinetic
of these scenes.
Completely agree. And the music, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that was something that I noticed as I was watching it. But there's again another moment of levity, of course, is that Ian is talking about how this is going to take forever, you have no idea, it could take weeks, and then all of a sudden of course the image pops up, they get a match. And one of the reasons of course they get that match so quickly is because it just so happens that Leaper X is a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps and is stationed.
Just so happens he's on leave. He's on break right now.
And he's on leave.
How Ian calls out, well, that's convenient.
right. In like in Sausalito, and yet where they're stationed is also not far. He's got a laundry list of medals that he's earned, all sorts of stuff. And then of course, Jenn and Magic are off to his mom's house to go track him down. And that's when we get the beautiful scene, like I said, with Martinez, and we learn more about
the season. And I'm sure that this was intentional in the way Garrow wrote it. There's a nice little parallel between Martinez and Ben, and about the family coming to the country, wanting a better life.
Yes. Man, when he drops that line about everything that the country has given him, and then he says, but there's one thing this country hasn't given me, and that's citizenship. I would fight for this country. I would die for this country.
And that's what I said, like,
awesome.
And we've been chatting offline. We've been chatting Matt Dell over at the Quantum Leap podcast. I said, I don't think that Martinez is evil.
No.
At all. And if you go back and you just like listen literally to like the words he says at the end of the last leap, I don't think he's bad. I don't think he has bad motives. I think he is just being a good soldier. I think he's doing like a little chest thumping, like he's being like a little bit bigger and braver than what he really is, and like telling Ben to back off. And I don't know if he fully understands the motives of whoever recruited him, of like,
and it's funny because this is something that we disagreed on, is that I feel like it's not necessarily chest thumping. I think that it's desperation. I think for Martinez, that I agree about the good soldier bit. I agree that there's an element to his leaping that is likely the directive of someone else. I don't think he's doing it on his own. Now, of course,
he's very much like Aaliyah.
Yes. right?
Yeah.
Only instead of being kind of one note, not that Aaliyah was necessarily one
No
note,
offense
but
to
her
Renee Coleman, but yes.
motives,
Yeah.
right? Her motives were certainly one note, right? And
Yeah.
Zoe, of course, we've got a wonderful actor, but at the same time, it was all very just, it was,
Yeah.
they are evil, until we decide that she's not, and Sam's going to rescue her. So the yes, I agree, and yet maybe this is their opportunity to kind of say like, that didn't work for us. Let's try and make it work. And now, again, here's somebody who's just following orders, right? But to me, yeah, it felt a little bit more desperate. It felt a little bit more like
I think we're on the same page. We're just
motivated.
using different words. Yeah.
It could be. Yeah. So, but yes, I agree. I think that there's something really beautiful about his character, and I just cannot wait to learn more about him and what, actually causes him to leap. I threw a theory out there and I was kind of like, yeah, that's kind of thin. I doubt that that's the case. But it's, yeah, again, I'm on board, with this character. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about them. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens next for the team, because when Magic and Jenn return, they're kind of stymied, right? They're just sort of like, I don't know. We don't know where to go from here. Like, obviously,
yeah, there's the thing. I just wish they would have said it out loud of just like, well, we can't interfere or we create a paradox.
Right. We can't stop this guy, right?
Yeah. I wish they would have just said that. Because I feel like that was the unspoken thing.
The interesting thing is too, is here's the thing that I posited, is that like Ben stepping into the accelerator, his whole mission was to stop Martinez from leaping for whatever reason. And that the point in the future he's going to, because that's the thing, the bomb that Ian drops on us later, is they say that Ben is not trying to get somewhere in the past. Ben's trying to get somewhere into the future. And Magic has this great line saying that that's not possible, which is wonderful, because we know, of course, in the original series, that the direction that they were heading, the idea was based off, of course, the finished scene that, between Al and Beth, is that Sam was in the future. At the start of season 6, Sam would have been in the future, and Al would have leapt into the future as well to try and track him down. But that never happened, so that's not canon. That's not, what I mean? That's just all suppositions on our part. But it's interesting to think that the way that their project works is that going into the future is something that, that's off limits. But it made me think like maybe that's the thing that Ben is trying to build up this momentum for, is to slingshot himself into the future so that he can stop Martinez from leaping, because they've discovered something. Janice has discovered something, or whatever. Who knows? And yeah,
I think from a paradox perspective, I wonder if it's going to be stop him from leaping or stop him from doing whatever he's going to do.
Right.
Because they can't stop him from leaping because they've already encountered each other.
Right. Which is again something that'll be fun to wrap our heads around and for the writers to play with.
Yeah.
They do talk about surveillance, and it's interesting because Magic, and again, that's the lovely thing about the character. I mean, the people are complicated, right? Is like Magic had no problem dangling the carrot of a dead brother in front of the senator or the congresswoman to get them, get her off their back in order to make sure that the project stays alive so that they can, get Ben back. But here he has kind of a hard time with putting surveillance on this young Marine, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. But he still does.
He's like, we'll do it, but we're not gonna, So the interesting thing is that after, of course, we've got this decision or non-decision to maybe perhaps surveil him a little bit, because they do decide to put some light surveillance on him, but they're not going to go, all in on
financials, blah blah blah. Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because even in the interview, they're asking him questions, leading questions. Do you need money? Do you need, and I think that, again, we get so much insight into the character. And I love the fact that Jenn, after they leave, Jenn's like, well, here's something I don't ever say. I trust him. And that is a nice, it was a nice cue, because even though the viewer, I was sold on this guy. There's this part of me that's just sort of like, well, if Jenn were to come out of there and Jenn were to say like something stinks about this guy, I would have been like, all right, like he's just a good actor. Like he's just, he's playing them.
I mean, I love his own line. Like you show up in street clothes. I can't remember how exactly he puts it. Like, you show up in street clothes, whatever. If it's a special ops mission, you had me at hello.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, he's an eager, good kid, and like he's there.
Yeah.
I again the parallel. You're absolutely right. The parallel between he and Ben, because we learn a lot. This is a perfect time, I guess, to kind of get back to the leap a little bit. Unfortunately, I still am not 100% sure that it works wholeheartedly. I hope for some people it does, but we learned so much about Ben in the course of this episode. We learned that he came to the United States when he was 9 years old, that was because of his mother. We don't know really anything about his father. His mother brought him to this country for a better future. His mother really, pushed him to excel. He's gifted, all this sort of stuff. So much so that his first high school report card, he intentionally gets B's on
Sure.
his report card because he doesn't want to be special. He doesn't want the pressure of that. He wants to just be a normal, regular kid. And Addison's like, you had an IQ of 197. Like, I can understand why she might be a little pissed. And they have this big fight, and he leaves. And when he comes back, she's had an aneurysm and she's dead on the floor. Raymond Lee is awesome. Thanks to Raymond Lee, this all works. If it wasn't for Raymond Lee and all we had were the flashbacks and the exposition that this is what it was, I'm sorry, it wouldn't work.
I tend to agree.
Unless, of course, you love melodrama. And
I think that may have been a little bit of the direction, because I know Jewel State is basically sci-fi royalty, especially because of her stint on Firefly. It's funny, last night we were watching the episode with Betsy, and Betsy recognizes her from an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which was way back,
awesome.
Which was like way back sooner. But I felt like her acting was melodramatic as well, and I've never seen her in anything else, so I've seen like a little bit of Firefly, but I felt like that was more of a direction thing than a actor's choice.
Oh, I would agree with that completely. Because again, seeing her work in Firefly, seeing her work in Stargate Atlantis, yeah, there was a contrast, and it feels like it gets heightened as it goes on. Sure. It feels to me that like at the beginning of the episode, I felt like it was a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more natural. And again, the stakes of the earthquake, the stakes of her son being missing, all this sort of stuff.
Sure,
it takes her up to that level, but I agree it does match the melodrama of the flashback scenes as well.
Sure. Now I will say, I don't know if this was something that was reshot or if it was just re-scripted after whatever version of the script that we got, but the townhouse scene when they go,
yes,
there are some additional details in there. Some details about Addison's parents.
Yep,
that was not in the script that we read at all. I felt like that either that was reshot or they decided to re-script it to tighten some things up a little bit.
The thing
is, like, they were in the house longer. They went upstairs. They looked in Jason's room. There was a whole thing about how Jason's room was just like the epitome of like 80s teenager, things like that, and all of that got cut down.
And wasn't that one of the things that also helped jog Ben's memory, is seeing Jason's Nintendo or something like that?
Exactly.
And like again, it was it's unfortunate because some of the stuff that got cut, like and it's funny because I asked around because I was trying to kind of again get a hint on like what's still in it, and I wanted to know if the flashbacks were still in, and if the and if the phone call was still in, and I was given the heads up ahead of time that they were, and I almost felt like the response was a little tepid. It's like, they're still there, and now I'm kind of like, I kind of get it. I get why maybe that was the response. I don't know, but that's just I'm reading.
Well, I mean, think like the way it was shot, like you either had to cut it or you had to superimpose a leap over Ben to leap out sooner.
Oh yeah, I mean you would, it would have truncated so much. I mean, and it was necessary. Yeah. It was necessary for so many reasons. It adds to the richness of the character. I'm glad it's there for the character. I think that it's important and integral to the character. They're good details to have. I'm just not necessarily 100% on board with the way that it was done. I don't hate it. I know it might sound like that because I'm being very critical of it. But again, I feel like at this particular point, maybe we've earned the ability to do that because I love the show. I love the show. I love the actors. I love the characters. I mean, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. I know that. But I am literally already putting Raymond and Ben on the same level that I put Scott and Sam. Like, that's how much I love him. That's how much I am invested in him, as an actor, as a character, the whole 9 yards. So, but again, I think I would have preferred the information be relayed in a slightly different manner than what it was relayed. The other thing that, again, I think is because of the whole, we got to focus on this leap, where, this is pilot footage mixed with, new footage, is that it felt just a little disconnected that Ben and Addison didn't get to maybe share some of the moments that I think they should have, and the way that they should have, especially when talking about their family and talking about their parents, like you mentioned. I feel like that's a conversation that we should have, I hesitate to use that word, but I would have appreciated their connection shining through a little bit more.
See, that's the thing, though. To me, that worked for me, because that townhouse scene that I first suspected that they reshot, because I felt like maybe they did reshoot it, because I did feel like a little bit more of that connection.
I agree, and the tunnel scene as well. Yeah.
No, here's the thing. Get to the tunnel scene here in a minute. So I asked you last night, the car scene where Ben rescues them from the car.
Yeah.
And the script, it's a subway car.
Yeah.
Like they're underground at that point, and like they're emptying an entire subway car, whatever. I'm sure that got changed what it was, just for budgetary reasons.
Yeah.
But I thought for sure that they had to reshoot that scene down in the underground tunnel, because of things Addison said about you don't get to hide things from me anymore, and I thought you were trusting me. That's all in the pilot script.
Yeah.
I forgot how much they hat tipped that Ben and Addison were engaged, because, again, reminder, I know we've mentioned this a lot in previous episodes, in the original pilot script, you don't find out they're engaged until one of the very last scenes, and you find out by Addison going home, and we see pictures on the wall of them together, and that's how we know. But I forgot like how much they were foreshadowing that in lines like that, because I thought, oh, they reshot this tunnel scene to include some of this stuff. No, that was original footage.
Yeah, and it works, actually. That's the thing that's interesting to me, is that I feel like that works. It really actually works, because there's this wonderful moment where, like, Ben says, "You're mad at me for leaping." And the interesting thing is like, even though that feels piloty in some ways, it still, to me, worked, because, again, the relationship is built. Now there's this new iron in the works, right? Now there's this idea that Ben has been withholding stuff, even about his family, from her. She's not really necessarily as forthcoming about her parents in the moment. So in a way, it kind of worked for him to bring that up, because it feels kind of like a lover's spat. You know what I mean? Sure, it didn't feel like, yeah.
And the thing it worked is like Addison's line about, you don't get to hide things for anymore. I thought you were just going to trust me. It takes on a whole new meaning, right after the episode, where, like, at the end of the leap before, he remembers that they're engaged, but then in the salvation episode, he remembers some details about their first date and their relationship. Those lines take on an entirely different meaning now.
And I kind of hope they don't junk that. I kind of hope that going forward, that they keep a little tension between them, that they kind of, because I think it's natural, right? You have these two people that are pulled apart by these circumstances. One of them doesn't remember anything, then starts to remember certain things. Of course, it's going to open the floodgates and be like, "Oh, I love you. I'm so glad that you're here," all this sort of stuff. And then there's going to be that moment, especially from the person that remembers everything, where they're sort of like, "Yeah, but you still left."
Yeah.
Like, you still left me here. And so I feel like it's actually, oddly enough, in this serendipitous way, it feels kind of natural. And again, I really hope that they're able to kind of continue that in some ways. Not over, I don't want it to be overbearing. I don't want it to be soap operatic. I don't want to go that direction, but I would love it if they still play with that, the nature of the relationship. Sure. Because all of the comments that have been made about, not enjoying the fact that they're engaged, or blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. To me, this is the stuff that makes that interesting. To me, this is the type of stuff where I'm sort of like, no, I dig this. I love that element. And not just because I'm, a romantic, and it's kind of like, oh, this, star-crossed romance separated by all the time or whatever, but because it's real.
It's real. And if this goes on multiple seasons, we're going to hit a point where maybe Addison is ready to move on.
Yeah. I just hope that we don't get like the shoehorned love interest at the project sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's not okay if something like that happens. I'm just saying that, like, I don't want it to feel
when
obvious.
when they introduce the guy and it's obvious that
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway,
I should
So
know just a small technical thing. The before the car scene that I was mentioning earlier, in the original script, it was a subway scene. In the script, that's where we got the line that they reused for the first episode. By the way, if the person if I leap into dies, you
yes.
die too. This was where it was placed in the original script.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the threat to Naomi didn't necessarily feel easy or low stakes, but the fact that they were kind of playing up the threat to Ben a little bit felt to me like, don't do that. Like, we know you're not going to kill Ben. We know that Ben's not going to die here. Don't make this feel too dangerous for Ben. Just let him be the hero. Let him go there, break out the window, get these people out safe, jump down. Everything's fine. Oh shit, Naomi just got shocked. And instead, I felt like they tried to stretch out the tension of like, Ben's in mortal danger here. And it's like, no, he's not. I'm not dumb. I am a seasoned television viewer, and I know you're not going to kill your lead. Like, come on.
Sure.
Sorry, that's kind of shitty, but still,
No,
that's
sure,
yeah. So one thing that we should mention here, we talked about, is that of course part of the mission they figure out is that Jason, their son, dies in a collapse of a house that collapses after the earthquake.
Yeah.
And it's in Oakland, right? And so like, Ben's like, we got to get back to Oakland. That's where Jason's going. How the hell are they going to get there? Everything's closed. We can use these tunnels. So they're going to take the tunnel across the transit authority to get to Oakland, and they've only got like an hour and a half to do it or something like that. And it's a crazy, how are they going to make this work? And of course, at this point, Naomi is taken off to the hospital, and Ben has to hoof it, which is of course where we get the tunnel scene where Addison is telling him to slow down. And again, it oddly felt very natural. It felt very like, I don't know, there was something about it that the tension between the two of them kind of coming to a head here, even though it's a holdover from the pilot, I think, especially based off of what I was told about like it being a 50-50 thing. It's like, well, if it's not 50-50, then maybe this is a reshoot, but if it's 50-50, this has probably got to be a holdover. And yet it still worked, I thought. They have this moment, they have the scene, and then of course they take off to get to the house. We get to the house. This is a point where, in addition to the hand link special effects, we should also mention that we get a lot of hologram special effects in this episode. For all the people that wanted to see Addison walk through a door, you get it. For all the people that wanted to see, Addison, the hand stuff that we kind of have already gotten in Salvation or Bust and previously, we get more of that here, where it's unfortunate because the production photo makes it look like her hand is actually on Ben, but in the episode, it does not look like her hand is actually touching him.
I will say this even more. In all of the trailers that we've seen for this episode, her hand goes down into like the edge of his head.
Yeah.
It's not even in the episode.
And another thing is
that shot. Yeah.
The production photos, as most people will realize that have checked them out on our website or elsewhere, because I'm sure that they're out there in like K-Site and other places. But if you've looked at the production photos, you'll notice that a lot of the production photos are from the pilot, not the actual episode, which is fascinating to me. And the biggest tell is Ian's outfit, which is very different. Ian's hair, their hair is longer now. Because we don't get some of the information about Jason that is in the original pilot script and was probably originally shot and had to be sacrificed. Sacrifices had to be made. That's all there is to it. Because of that, I feel like the scene between Ben and Jason, it works, but again, it felt like it was maybe missing a little something.
The scene with Ben and Jason
outside the house. Let me just say outside the house.
The house afterwards.
Not afterwards. I'm talking about when they first see each other.
Oh, I got you.
And Jason's like, Mr. Walker's left inside, or Wheeler. Wheeler.
I think Wheeler. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that didn't bug me so much because it was like the stakes of like getting inside to save Wheeler.
Right.
I was going to say afterwards, a little melodramatic afterwards. What made it work for me, I don't think we've gotten a shot anything like this anywhere in the previous episodes. The shot of Ben and Jason hugging, and then we go past them and we see Ben's reflection in the car window.
Yeah, that was, I agree. That was beautiful. That worked really, really well. Saving Mr. Wheeler, I thought worked really well. The beam falling on Ben worked really well. What I loved so much about that moment,
The
it's it,
hologram, her, yeah.
yeah, and not only well,
I'm
no,
kidding.
no. The thing that I love so much about that moment was Jason, because we've seen Ben have so much agency prior to this and be so assertive in so many situations, including this one, including going up and saving Mr. Wheeler. He doesn't have to do that. He decides to do that. And he knows the chances are slim. Oh, how could I forget? One of the best moments of the episode is when Ziggy says there's a 30% chance, only a 30% chance that you'll be able to get him out and survive. And it's like Ben doesn't think twice.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, Ben basically looks at her as like, okay, I get it. I'm going.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
my Ben song, and he goes in there and he saves Mr. Wheeler. The beam falls on him. And it feels like, in a way, and again, this is weird because we know that this was shot first, the show has earned Ben getting rescued. Because I feel like, in a way, like if this had happened in the pilot, there'd be an element of like, oh, our hero has to get rescued by his son, which was a nice moment. Don't get me wrong, but I could see how some people might be critical of it. 6 episodes in, however, I don't know, it almost feels earned in a way, which is a weird thing to say. I get that, but Jason comes in and helps, Ben move the beam, and they get out of there. And then again, they share that embrace, and we see the mirror image, and it works really well. And then, of course, they're back to the hospital, and Jason's reunited with his mom. And of course, the impetus, of course, for Ben getting Jason back with his mom, he never had the chance to make amends with his mom. It's like, it's, again, the logic is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, but how it's done feels a little bit like, I don't know. It feels, you know what it feels like? Here's my issue with it. It feels very standard TV like moment. It feels very much like, you must make amends with your mother, because just imagine if you never got the chance to do that, and Raymond, of course, sells it. Raymond's amazing, but like, again, it ends up feeling very, some parts just, I guess, feel almost a little hokey.
Yeah, and the thing, it's a small thing, but it's losing the scene with Ian investigating Jason's Instagram.
Yep.
And that difference, it's just that it's like when you put a concrete thing to it, and a very real thing that people can understand right now, which is social media.
Yeah, it really worked.
And how life is portrayed through there really worked through there. Should also note, in the original pilot, there was a lot more interplay between Addison and Ian.
Yes.
Through the hand link back and forth. And I think that's a conceit that they've kind of shed.
Yeah.
Now in the new version, but they couldn't help but keep a few of those moments in there in this episode.
And I think part of that is also just the idea that you begin to, Ian was much more of a conduit for Ziggy in that pilot script.
Yeah.
Well, and part of the thing is Ziggy wasn't working for most of the pilot episode. Like, Ziggy wasn't even on for most of that pilot episode. Ziggy doesn't come on until like the 3rd act or something like that, if I remember right.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Ian was kind of the conduit for all the information, whereas now Ian has a very different function. So I'm okay that they did away with that. It'll be interesting to see if they do, again, in kind of my speculation / headcanon, Janice is the one that's going to, really tap into Ziggy's full power and full potential, and that's when we'll probably hear Deborah Pratt's voice. If that happens, it might not happen. You never know. Ziggy may never speak, but if that happens, I believe that to me that makes sense for it to happen. But I think I'm okay with them not using it like a walkie-talkie almost. You know what I mean?
Sure. Or even more, and like once they've opened this, like if they show Ian talking once, like they'll probably show that going forward. I kind of like the mystery of the old series, like when Al talked to Gushy, like you never heard the other side of the conversation, which was kind of a neat thing. But now that we're seeing so much of the project, I don't know if that's a genie that you can put back in the bottle.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So anyway, so Ben leaps. We get a couple additional scenes back at the project. And the one thing that I like overall is that since they did have so much time to fill because of things that they've lost, is that they were able to take their time a little bit more with project scenes and have a little bit more like levity and talk. Like they kept it kinetic, they kept it moving, but they had a little bit more. And the scene between Addison and Jenn
Yeah.
at the end of the episode, which is very nice. You get a call back to the housewives.
Yeah.
And I love how they took like this vulnerability that Ben already had the pilot episode anyway, but now now Martin's weaved it into the saying of Addison's line, like he's even more vulnerable in a way that he never was before, and I'm falling more for him, and we got to call him.
Jenn,
yeah.
And I love that Jenn gets it. I love that Jenn doesn't judge her. I love that, Jenn doesn't have like that there's not, that there's, I love that Jenn is so supportive in that moment. There's something about the fact that, because we talked about this beforehand, we talked about the idea of there being conflict between, members of the project back home and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure that there'll be opportunities to pepper that in, of course, but I'm loving that we're seeing so much support between, our four main characters back in 2022. I'm really enjoying that.
The reason why I'm liking this so much and why the Next Generation is my favorite Star Trek is because you have these group of core characters that genuinely like each other, and they may have conflict, but by the end of the episode, they all support each other.
Yeah.
Same reason why I like the Orville. That's side note.
Yeah, it really works nicely. And I think that the thing is it will make those moments of conflict, which are inevitable. They're inevitable. It will make them mean more. It will make them mean more. If we saw these people, constantly bickering, if we saw there constantly being, some sort of conflict, not that anybody would ever do that, but if that were the case, it would just, it would start to feel monotonous and it wouldn't work. And the fact that we're getting these genuine, beautiful relationships developing between these people, I think will make the moments when there becomes, when the seeds of distrust are sown for whatever reason, it will mean a little bit more. And I, I'm here for it. And I think that the vulnerability line plays beautifully into Salvation or Bust too, because the Ben in Salvation or Bust seems to be, again, very vulnerable. And you get the idea that maybe the direct approach that he's taking with Addison is a little bit different from the approach that Ben in the present day had with her sometimes, right down to the fact, like, is it possible to kiss a hologram because I really want to right now? Like, maybe that's not the way that Ben would have been, right? And now he is, and that's, and that's something that, is causing her to fall for him even more. So kudos to Martin Garrow, honestly, because I feel like what he was able to do with this episode, and how it helps to further the story, how it helps to further the character beats, is takes some real skill and real creativity. And I think that, there's a reason he's our showrunner. And I think that he really did hit it out of the park. As much criticism as we've given the episode, I do really feel like it's successful. And, the caveat being that it's successful under circumstances which might not necessarily be the most ideal. And then of course we get the leap out, which
love everything about it. I
me too.
love the callback. Love the callback to the B-Man with the 669.
Yep. And then
when I saw that above the door, I was like, oh, I know what's happening. Yeah.
And the thing too that I loved about this is that it felt so different from anything else we've seen so far. The way it was shot, the way it was lit, everything about it. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I am so looking forward to the Halloween episode. I think it's going to be pretty special. And then, we've already kind of gotten confirmation from Dean Jagaris on Twitter. He posted some stuff, tweeted us, and independent of us as well, that episode is going to make people, just fall in love with the show, even more in love with the show than we already are, and that they're going to follow it up with something completely different. So, I think 7 and 8 are going to be pretty special episodes. And having seen some of the stuff that you and I have been privy to even further on down the line, there's some really great stuff cooking, like some really interesting, really wonderful stuff on the way. And
I mean, from both like Leap stories, what they're planning to do with Leap stories, and also like with the project stuff.
Yes.
Because it's not a thing of like some seasons of Lost where they introduce high stakes and they just leave you
hanging,
leave you hanging for a while. Like in the next couple of episodes, like things are going to kick up a notch and they're just going to continue.
Yeah. Yes.
Picking up.
I mean, by the time this season is done, I mean, we're not even halfway yet. But by the time this season is done, I mean, it's clear that they're gonna have taken us for a hell of a ride.
Yeah. And even if it's only one season, we'll see. If it's only one season,
I don't think
it's gonna be a hell of a ride. We'll see.
I think that there are I'll try and say this as kindly as possible. There are a couple of websites out there that delight in nothing more than, stirring the pot and being, just trashy and antagonistic and bottom feeding.
I almost posted a thing from my personal account today that I was like, it's not worth tweeting about, but I'll say it on the podcast. Sites like that, they have to put out articles right now saying that the show is headed towards cancellation because they got to get clicks. They go whatever.
Yeah.
The show's been picked up for a full season. What are they going to do? Talk about how the show is stable right now? I mean, there are ebbs and flows and ratings from week to week, and I understand that there may be some validity to the numbers, but sites like that, the only reason that they're posting this stuff is that they need clicks. They know. And you just like from the slant.
Well, they know their audience.
Yeah,
their audience delights in that sort of stuff too.
And you can tell like the way some of the articles are written.
Yeah,
and so it's just like that's. So one, if you're a hater and you delight in that, go more power to you.
How the hell are you listening to us right now?
What are you doing listening to us right now?
Yeah,
but also because I've seen some people like post it and like be worried about it. Like don't. Like the thing is like we don't know. Like
we don't know.
Like some numbers may be low, but like I said, it's been picked up for a full season. Right now, it's one of the top shows on Peacock, and that
it's tied. It's tied for first among the ratings of all new network television shows. Think about that for a second. Contextualize it's important to have the context of the numbers. And I will admit that I usually will throw out the ratings on Twitter, without that context. And I've tried to there were a couple of great posts by other sites that I retweeted this past week because it gave that context, because it's important to contextualize those numbers. And when you see the fact that this show is basically the number one rated new show on network television, that's a huge deal. When you see that the DVR numbers are great for it, when you hear that the Peacock streaming numbers, regardless of whether or not we're privy to the specifics of it, are strong and great. I mean, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that based off of what we've seen, that it is the number one, it's basically the number one currently airing television show on Peacock. Think about that for a second. Out of all the shows that NBC currently airs or USA currently airs that they then stream on Peacock, Quantum Leap is number one, or has been number one. That's huge in this day and age. Mm-hmm. So I who knows what'll happen? Nobody can tell. It's way too early to tell. The actual sites out there that do trade on this, is it canceled or not, or TV Line or those sorts of things, even they're not saying anything yet, right? Because it's just too early to tell. But anyway, away from all of that.
Anyway, I just enjoy the show. The thing is, right now, whether this gets one season or multiple seasons, we're enjoying the hell out of the show right now.
Yeah.
We do know that we got a full season. It's going to have a complete arc. So even if we only get one season, we are going to get a complete story. And I'm not going to get left hanging. We're not going to be. We're not going to be
journeyman.
Yeah, we're not going to be journeyman. We're not going to be left hanging. Depending on what Scott Bakula decides, we may be left hanging on whatever happened to Sam. But I think as far as Ben and this current project story and Leaper X, I think that'll all get a satisfactory conclusion. So just enjoy the ride that we're on right now.
Yeah. Here's a question for you as we're talking about these things. Do you think the end game for this season involves Ben getting back home?
You mean like he gets back home, but then he finds another reason to leap and goes back out? If there's a,
here's the reason why I don't think that that's going to be the case, because I don't think they're going to leave us on a cliffhanger. I literally mean at the end of the season, like he's back home. And like
Sure.
and that if it ends, if that's it, if they don't get renewed.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
But obviously if there, if there's a renewal, then yes, then they can shoot a scene where it's like he has another reason to get back in the accelerator or something. But like, I'm just curious, does he get back home?
I certainly think I'm leaning towards
right, because I think that again,
if they only get one season, he's going to get back home.
Even if they don't, I think he still gets back home. And here's one of the reasons why. I think it's an opportunity to do something different. If they just leave him out there stuck in time, traveling, leaping from one leap to the next, hoping that each, leap will be the next leap home or whatever, then don't they just lean into the idea that they're just kind of retreading that same old ground? If he comes home, doesn't that change change everything? And how does it change things? And what happens after that? And does Addison finally get the chance to leap? You know what I mean? Like, again, I just think that there's a lot of really cool stuff that they can play with that, that doesn't necessarily retread. So we'll see. But overall, I just want to say, kind of in closing about this episode, I think that there's some really, really, really wonderful moments throughout. I think there's some incredibly strong moments throughout. I think it can't help but be a little disjointed. I think that some of the things don't work, and it's not because of what they did, it's just because of how they did it. And unfortunately, it does lead me to the belief that the justification for not using this as the original pilot, I can understand. Sure. And I hate to say that, because again, I really liked it on the page.
I think both you and me were expecting to come into this episode wagging our finger at NBC.
You should have done this.
Being like, what were you thinking not making this the first episode?
Yeah.
And I think we both found ourselves going, oh, okay.
Right. And that's not to say that July 13th, 1985, that I now think is like so much better or whatever. I still have some issues with the episode. But yeah,
because we should say, and maybe this on a closing note, then we'll like go into listener mail, is that I think part of the reason like why the episode wouldn't work, like that entire scene in 1985 in the first episode where Addison is explaining to Ben who Sam was and how we lost him and blah blah blah. I'm pulling up the picture. That was all in this episode. First scene while earthquake aftermath was going on, and even on the page, it seemed a little weird. And let's say like I don't know if like on the screen if it would have worked.
Yeah. And again, you know what? I really do. I love our cast. I love everybody about it. I think that they're just fantastic. I love that each week I find new reasons to appreciate Nanrissa and Jenn as a character. I find, that Ian, of course, Mason continues to just knock it out of the park, and they are such a delight in everything that they do. And I can't wait to see more from them. I love that. I love everything that Ernie brings to Magic. I love Caitlin as Addison. I love the chemistry and the relationship that she's developing, with Raymond and Ben. But again, at the end of the day, the thing that sold me on that premiere episode is the same thing that instills in me that like, holy shit, like we got something special here. It comes down to when Raymond looked at Caitlin and said, "You made me feel safe today." Like the actor, not just the character. I was sold.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that happens in this episode. Any qualms I have with this episode, all I have to do is look at Raymond and I'm sold.
Mm-hmm.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
And if they don't have him locked up to a long-term contract, we might be looking for a new main character, because the guy, he's gonna go places, you know.
He's kind of like Tom Hanks. It's funny, someone off the record said that he's kind of like Tom Hanks. That line was in the pilot script. They mentioned his I think somebody like Addison mentioned his what is like ING, INJ, Myers-Briggs, the Myers-Briggs score thing.
Mm,
The Myers-Briggs score thing that gets brought up. And I think Addison said, like, yeah, he's kind of like Tom Hanks.
mm. INFP here. What about you?
INFP. That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. That's what I am.
Oh yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think that's what Ben is. So yeah. So
Yeah.
that. But anyway, so yeah, because like the person said, like, yeah, he's kind of like Tom Hanks, and then I saw that line in the script. I was like,
Right.
there
Yeah.
we go.
Yeah, no, he's just phenomenal, and there's some incredible moments that he gets throughout the course of this episode, and yeah, I mean, I think that it'll be really interesting to hear the dialogue afterwards. You know, if people have questions, if people want to tell us that we got it wrong or we got it right or whatever, you can always find us on Twitter at Fates Wide Wheel or over on Facebook, Fates Wide Wheel as well, Instagram, TikTok, or you can send us an old-fashioned email at fateswidewheelpodcast@gmail.com. You
Yes.
can also tell us if the joke I'm about to make is getting run into the ground, and that's that I am drinking this incredible can of Zevia right now. Not our sponsors, but they could be.
I'm drinking Buble, not our sponsors, but they could be. Another way you can contact us, and this is the way some folks did, is like through our website. We have a contact me page. So some folks did just a couple short emails this week. Jason wants to ask, what does the general public think happened to Sam? He was a Nobel Prize winner, been in Time Magazine, played Carnegie Hall, etc.
Great freaking question.
That's wonderful. That's a great way. And one way, Matt Dale, like he's done this out before, because someone posted the picture of Sam's driver's license.
Oh yeah,
image, like the hologram. I think Larry Trujillo posted that. Like, hey, what happened?
where's the Velcro? Right. Yeah.
Where's the Velcro? Because he was expecting magic to flash that when they go to
right.
Martinez's house. In classic OG canon, while it is not canon, it's very widely accepted that Sam leaped in April of 1995 based on the comments that were made about the Lakers playoff game
Mm-hmm.
in the pilot episode. But someone has pointed out before, I think Matt in his book pointed out that on the driver's license, like the date of issue was like August of 1995. And the idea has been thrown out like, oh, like Project Quantum Leap was like involved in like covering up the fact that Sam had traveled in time.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know that the Senate committee knows from Honeymoon Express. But I think honestly, and I'm just like really thinking about this off the top of my head, we're in the mid 90s, we're pre-internet era. If somebody drops off the radar, they just kind of drop off.
Yeah. Well,
like, and like even if I mean like Elon Musk has made an ass out of himself the last several months, but even before he became like what he's been, like being forced to buy Twitter or something, you know, whatever. But honestly, like a year ago, if Elon Musk just fell out of the public eye suddenly, relatively speaking, most people wouldn't. Like they just figured he'd be just working, running this company.
Right. Well, and also just think about the fact that, you know, the people that have won like a Nobel Prize for physics or something like that, like name one, Dennis. Exactly. Right? Yeah. So I feel like that there, you know, that again, Sam would have probably had a little bit more notoriety than that. I mean, he played Carnegie Hall. He, you know, he did this, he did that, or whatnot. But yeah, I think overall that it probably wouldn't have been something that the public really even noticed, right? You know, I mean, think about the time and effort that he spent working on Project Quantum Leap, and we're talking about like 5 or 6 years, just, you know, in a cavern in New Mexico, you know, in essence, working tirelessly on getting this project started. So I feel like it might not necessarily have been noticed. I do think that there's absolutely room for like a nosy reporter, you know, who wants to do a story on this reclusive, you know, Nobel Prize winner, genius, you know, cover of Time magazine, etc. That has seemingly dropped off the face of the earth. And I think that would be a really wonderful story to tell. But
I will say now in the new series, now that it's been 30 years since he disappeared, like you said, that would, I never thought about it before, but that would be an interesting story.
And what a cool way to involve the character of Sam Beckett without needing Scott Bakula at all, right?
Yeah. With not, because Aguero said like they're not going to bring Sam back in another way, like as far as like having another actor play him like the lead or something, because that would be disrespectful to Scott. But that could be a very, like I said, just very interesting way to bring Sam back without bringing Sam back. It's just like the question of in the, you know, in pop culture, in the culture, like, hey, whatever happened to him?
Yeah, I think that would actually be kind of cool. Thank you, Jason. It's a great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Great question.
And then Stephen, not a question, just saying, I'm from Perth, Western Australia. Just discovered your podcast because of the reboot and went to
Thank
listen
you,
to the
sir.
older episodes. Loving the podcast. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Indeed,
Appreciate it. Again,
welcome.
apologies for
And
all of the
yeah.
lo-fi goofiness in our earlier
Do you
episodes.
remember back in the day when I first started editing the podcast and I was going to endeavor to, cut out pauses and flubs and repetition and ums and ahs and all that sort of stuff? And I tried doing that with our first episode and I was like, dude, no way. This isn't going to happen. Like,
There
this
is
just not.
there is value in, like, what is the thing that you will just get it put out into the world?
Well, and then I remember we did some research and we started reading about stuff like that. And one of the articles that I read that really stuck with me is it's like, that's not what people want to hear. People want to hear you talk to them like you would talk to them, not some sort of odd clipped, they're not listening to NPR. They're not listening to the news here. And no shame, NPR is awesome. I'm not saying that, but like, they're not, they don't
Sure.
want like a 30-second soundbite for a news report. Like, they're listening to some sort of long form, really long form in some instances, audio medium, and that involves two people having a conversation, and they want to be a part of that conversation. And I feel like if it's too polished, if it's too much, it's just, it doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that I'm so excited about the Halloween episode. And I know,
me too.
And I know, I mean, we'll get it probably a couple days early, hopefully. But this is one I'm particularly excited to watch live.
Me too.
And
yes. It's
and I will. Somebody suggested on social media, I am going to put a sign on the door of my house with a bowl of candy saying, "We are watching Quantum Leap. Go to way." By the way, we have a podcast. I'm going to generate a QR code. Put it up on the door. Listen to our No, I'm not going to be so egotistical to say listen to our podcast. What I'm going to do is I may actually put a thing up and say, "Hey, I'm downstairs watching Quantum Leap. It's a really awesome show. If you don't know about it, you should watch it. Here's a QR code. Go to peacock.com or whatever."
Totally. That's a great idea.
Spread the love that way.
Yeah. God, there's so many people that I want to thank, and it would just take too long. So I will just say this: if you have engaged with us in any way, shape, or form on Twitter this past week, there is a 90% chance that you were talking to me. I know it's confusing sometimes because we don't always sign our tweets, but I've been doing most of the tweeting, certainly this past week.
Sure.
And I just want to say it's been so much fun. Thank you all so much. I really have enjoyed the conversations that are happening, even if all I'm able to do is just like something and not necessarily reply back or whatever. I am, it's so exciting to see the conversations that are happening between people, whether it's the funny stuff or the more serious stuff or the stuff that's kind of like tangential to Quantum Leap or, adjacent to the episodes and whatnot. There's just so many wonderful people, Lauren and Carol and Larry and Adrian and Mike. And, again, it's impossible for me to name everybody, but it's just awesome. And I'm so appreciative of you all. I have absolutely loved seeing that thus far the community that has been created by the old school fans, the new school fans, is just so generous and giving and understanding and fun. It's everything that I could have possibly hoped for. I want to tell you too that if you've checked out the Quantum Leap subreddit at any point in the past 5 years or so, it was pretty dead, and when it wasn't, it was just kind of weird. And then in the lead up to the show over the past 6 months or so, it was kind of a dumpster fire. And somewhere in the past 4 or 5 weeks, it turned into another really wonderful space most of the time. There's still some posts that you just know to stay away from. But even over there, it's clear that the fans of this show and the people that love this show are really about fostering an environment where anybody is welcome and anybody can come and talk about the show and have a good time with the show. And even the folks that aren't necessarily that, there's still a space for some thoughtful discussion. And the moment that doesn't happen, that it turns a little one way or another, the thing that I have loved being able to do is just put it down and walk away and go find my friends, go find the people that are having those really nice, lovely discussions, even when we disagree about something. And so I'm just grateful for that. It's been very enjoyable, and keep on posting, keep on engaging. Let's just keep the conversation rolling. Tell us what you think of What a Disaster. And I
Wait.
just Halloween is gonna be fun,
It's
man.
going to be fun. Yeah. And let's tell you about our families over at Facebook and TikTok. It seems like Twitter is just like it provides for like just like quicker conversations, just the way that the website is laid out. But we love our folks who are on Facebook. TikTok, I have not been posting as much just because a tweet you can just fire a quick tweet. TikTok with the video aspect, it's just a little bit more. And sometimes TikTok is weird. A couple weeks ago, I literally spent an hour putting a video together, like showing the alternate ending to the original series, and it got pulled down for some weird copyright thing. And I literally spent an hour working on that video, captioning it because the sound is not great, and it got pulled down in 5 minutes. And so sometimes TikTok is just it can be the way TikTok is ran. People on TikTok are wonderful.
Yeah.
The way it's ran sometimes, and the weird community violations and copyright stuff that gets pulled down, it can be a dumpster fire. So I get there when I can. I love it. I love it. But yeah, but everything that Sam just said. Let us know what you thought about What a Disaster. If you thought it was a disaster, if you thought it was it was a 5.5. And like
and
I
if
said,
you loved it.
Next week, oh ye of little faith.
Oh ye of little faith.
I'm gonna make, and we can sign off on this note. I'm gonna have to make a confession. I need to do my homework before the Halloween episode next week. Sam, would you believe I have never seen The Exorcist?
Same.
I've seen The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I've seen The Last Exorcism.
You know what? Actually, that's not true. That's not true. I have seen it. I saw it probably about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe like 21 years ago. And there were substances involved. I had a wild youth. What can I say? I don't remember a lot of it, but I did see it. We were at a friend's house, big horror film aficionado, and he was screening it that night. And so I have seen it, but there were substances. So
there was
I'm a little foggy.
Yeah, and you go watch that. If you want some horror movie recommendations on a sign off here, The Last Exorcism was the first horror movie that me and Betsy watched.
Oh, nice.
Which is it was of the mockumentary variety, basically like a guy, a charlatan, very charismatic. He does exorcisms. He's a sham. He knows he's a sham. He decides to do one last exorcism for a documentary team to like show his tricks, because he feels like he's got a conscience now. And so like he wants to show his tricks, and he wants to reveal, and he wants to out other schemers stuff.
Yeah.
And sure enough, on the one last exorcism that he does for the team, guess what happens?
It's for real.
It's for real. Yeah. And it's actually it's a pretty decent one. Saw Halloween Ends this last week.
Nice.
I really a lot of people really hate it.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. Nice. Because to me, I'm not going to do a whole long thing because I know we're wrapping up here. If you hate Halloween Ends, we have a fundamental difference in what we think Michael Myers means in our culture.
Oh, interesting. Well, now I feel like I need to see it. Anyway. I hadn't seen the original Halloween until like a year or two ago. It was a big gap for me. I hadn't seen it. You and I had talked about it before. We talked about the other films. I kind of knew, everything about it, what was going to happen, but I'd never seen it before. And then I finally got the chance to see it.
We'll talk about more off mic here, but it's like if you've seen the Halloween movies or whatever, like go check this one out.
Yeah.
Well, but on that note,
we need to go back to listening to Taylor Swift's Midnight.
That we do.
Anti-hero, man.
Oh, Anti-hero. I don't know if I haven't seen it anywhere else, but on TikTok, there's some interesting discourse going around about Anti-hero and the music video.
The music video is fascinating.
Especially people are taking issue with the music video and one moment the music video. Go. I'm just like, I'm almost tempted to chime in on the discourse, but I don't want to because it just turns into a dumpster fire. Anyway, go listen to Taylor Swift's Midnight. You never thought you'd hear that on Fates.
I know, right? Hey
All right.
man, she has turned into like I think one of our best artists, musical artists. I mean, I just think that say anything you want about co-writing credits and etc. That she has on some of her songs, some of her albums or whatever. There are people that want to work with her that I respect a great deal. I have a lot of respect for her too, and I think that especially over the past 10 years. Yeah, I mean, she has released some incredible music and has become just a wonderful lyricist. And yeah, I mean, she's a cut above what we get from other pop stars. For somebody who started off as sort of a weird quasi bubblegum country sort of artist, what she has become, it's forced to be reckoned with, to say the least. And I have enjoyed, even if it's not necessarily my musical style, it's really hard not to enjoy her music.
Sure.
For a lot of those reasons. So anyway, watch the hate mail roll in. No. All right. Well, I'm gonna get out of here.
Right.
This
Take
has
care.
been fun as
Have a great
usual.
week. Yeah.
Yep.
As
Stay
always.
safe out there. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. And as always, leap responsibly.
Have a great week, everyone.